I've always enjoyed hiking alone. There's something about being completely surrounded by nature that clears my mind. That day, I had followed an old, unmarked trail I had found on a map, far from the crowded tourist paths. The forest was dense, the scent of pine and damp earth thick in the air. The only sounds were my own footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves. It was peaceful until I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Just off the trail, half hidden by trees, was a small clearing that didn't feel right. There, in the center, was a fully set-up campsite. A single tent, zipped shut. A small fire, still burning. A backpack sitting beside a pile of neatly arranged supplies. It looked recent, untouched. But something was off. I called out, expecting to hear someone answer. The woods swallowed my voice. No movement, no response, just silence. My gut twisted. Someone had to be close if the fire was still burning. I hesitated before stepping closer, my pulse quickening. Everything looked normal at first glance, but there were no footprints around the site. No paths leading away. No sign of struggle. Just a campsite frozen in time. I crouched beside the backpack, feeling like I was intruding. Inside, I found food, water, a first aid kit, exactly what you'd expect. But no wallet, no ID, no phone. No clue about who this stuff belonged to. My eyes drifted to the tent. The zipper was closed all the way. For some reason, I couldn't bring myself to open it. My skin prickled. A deep, instinctual warning told me I didn't want to see what was inside. The longer I stood there, the worse the feeling got. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe someone left in a hurry. Maybe they'd gone for a short walk. But why leave the fire burning? And why weren't there any footprints? It didn't add up. I took a few steps back, my heart beat loud in my ears. The trees around me felt taller, closer. The stillness was suffocating. I debated staying. Maybe they'd be back soon. Maybe I was overreacting. But that off feeling in my gut refused to fade. It was like the forest itself was telling me to leave. I decided I needed to find a ranger. If something had happened, they would know what to do. I turned and walked away, my neck prickling like something was watching me. As I made my way back to the trail, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The fire's smoke curled lazily into the sky, completely undisturbed. The tent remained still, zipped tight. The whole place felt frozen, like a moment trapped in time. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep moving. The forest felt different now. The peacefulness I'd enjoyed earlier had been replaced by something heavier. The further I got from the site, the more I felt like I was being followed. But every time I stopped to listen, there was nothing. Just silence. Not even birds or wind in the trees. Just the suffocating weight of something unseen. Finally, I spotted the ranger station in the distance. The small wooden building felt like a lifeline. I hurried toward it, trying to shake the unsettling feeling that I had just walked away from something I wasn't meant to see. The ranger station was empty, except for a single man behind the desk. He looked like he had been here forever, middle-aged, weathered, the kind of guy who probably knew every inch of this forest. I stepped inside, still catching my breath, and quickly explained what I had found. The whole time he just listened, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he let out a slow breath and muttered, "It happens." I frowned. It happens? That was it? No concern, no urgency? Just those two words, like I had told him something completely ordinary. I felt my frustration spike. I pressed him. What did he mean? Had this happened before? Was someone missing? He didn't answer. He just grabbed his hat, stood up, and motioned for me to follow. The hike back felt different. The woods had been quiet before, but now the silence felt unnatural. Oppressive. The ranger didn't say much, and when he did, his words weren't reassuring. When I asked if he had seen things like this before, he simply said, "You spend enough time out here, you see all kinds of things." That wasn't the kind of answer I wanted. The longer we walked, the heavier the air felt. The trail seemed unfamiliar, even though I had just been here. Something about the trees, the way the light filtered through the leaves, it all felt off. I started second-guessing myself. Had I actually found that campsite? Had I imagined it? The thought sent a cold chill down my spine. Finally, we reached the spot. But as soon as I stepped into the clearing, my stomach dropped. The campsite was gone. No tent. No fire. No backpack. Just untouched forest, as if no one had ever been there at all. My breath caught in my throat. I turned in circles, searching for anything, but there was nothing. Panic surged through me. I had marked the trees before leaving. A small scratch on the bark to make sure I could find my way back. The scratches were still there. But everything else, everything was gone. My chest tightened. This was impossible. It didn't make sense. I turned to the ranger, expecting confusion or concern. But he just stood there, looking at the empty clearing with an expression I couldn't read. Then finally he spoke. "Well, there you go." That was it. No shock, no questions, just those words. Like this was something he had seen before. Something he expected. My hands clenched into fists. I wanted to demand answers, to make him explain, but the way he looked at me, it shut me up. Not because he was threatening, but because he was calm. Too calm. A realization settled in my gut like a stone. Whatever had happened here, whatever was happening, he wasn't surprised. Because this wasn't new to him. And that was the part that scared me the most. I stood there, heart hammering, staring at the empty clearing. My brain scrambled for an explanation, but none of them made sense. I had been here. I had seen the tent, the fire, the backpack. The smoke had still been rising when I left. There was no way I had imagined it. I turned to the ranger, waiting for some kind of reaction. But he just stood there, hands on his hips, staring at the space where the campsite had been. His face was unreadable. I took a shaky step forward, my eyes scanning every inch of the ground. There should have been some trace, ash from the fire, flattened grass where the tent had stood, something. But there was nothing. The forest floor looked untouched, as if no one had ever been here. Even the air smelled different. No lingering smoke. No faint scent of burned wood. Just damp earth and pine. A cold sweat prickled at my skin. I moved to the tree where I had scratched a small mark before leaving. It was still there, right where I had left it. This was the place. I hadn't imagined it. But if the campsite had been real, where the hell had it gone? My stomach twisted as a thought crept into my mind. One I didn't want to consider. Had it ever really been there at all? I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. No. I knew what I saw. I turned back to the ranger, feeling desperate now. "You saw the mark," I said, my voice unsteady. "This was the place. You believe me, right?" He didn't answer right away. He just studied me for a long moment, like he was deciding how much to say. Then, with a slow shrug, he muttered, "Doesn't really matter, does it?" Frustration flared in my chest. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I snapped. Things don't just disappear. But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. This place, this silence, the wrongness of it all, it made me feel like I had stepped into something I wasn't supposed to. Like I had stumbled across a crack in reality, and now the world was trying to pretend it had never been there. The ranger didn't answer me. Instead, he turned back toward the trail. "You should head back," he said over his shoulder. "It's getting late." That was it. No explanation. No reassurance. Just that same unsettling indifference. He started walking, and for a second, I just stood there, torn between following him and staying to search for something that could prove I wasn't losing my mind. Then as I took a step forward, I noticed it. A single object, half buried in the dirt. My pulse spiked as I knelt down and pulled it free. It was a glow stick. The kind hikers carry for visibility at night. My throat went dry. There hadn't been one at the site before. And it looked fresh. As if someone had just dropped it. I looked up, scanning the trees. My breath came faster. The feeling of being watched, of something unseen lurking just beyond my vision, had returned. And this time it was unbearable. Something had been here. Maybe something still was. I didn't wait to find out. My instincts screamed at me to move, to get the hell out of there. I turned and hurried after the ranger, my fingers clenched around the glow stick. The trail felt longer than before, the trees pressing in on all sides. Every rustle of leaves sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me. But there was nothing. Just silence. The ranger didn't look back as we walked. He kept a steady pace, his posture relaxed, as if none of this fazed him. I wanted to ask more questions. Had he seen this happen before? Did he know what was out here? But I was afraid of the answers. Afraid he'd just shrug again and say, "It happens." After what felt like an eternity, we reached the edge of the forest. My car was parked just ahead, right where I had left it. Relief flooded me, but it was mixed with something else, something uneasy. I turned to the ranger one last time. "What if it happens again?" I asked, gripping the car door. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Then don't go looking for it," he said. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back into the trees. I watched him go until he disappeared into the forest, swallowed by the green and the shadows. I stood there for a long moment, my mind spinning. Then I got in my car and drove away, my hands gripping the wheel too tightly. I didn't stop until I was miles away from the park. Even then, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following me. The glow stick sat on the passenger seat, a reminder that I hadn't imagined it. That something had been there. That something had watched me find it. A few weeks passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The unease, the wrongness. I started researching missing persons cases in that area, expecting to find something, anything, that could explain what I saw. But I found nothing. No reports of an abandoned campsite. No hikers gone missing recently. It was like none of it had ever happened. Then one night, as I was scrolling through old forums about strange disappearances in national parks, I saw a post that made my blood run cold. It was from a guy who had been hiking alone in a different state years ago. He had found a campsite just like mine, intact, abandoned, a fire still burning. And when he came back with help, it was gone. The only response he had gotten from the locals? It happens. I haven't been hiking since. I tell myself it was just a weird, unexplainable event, the kind of thing that happens sometimes. But deep down I know better. That campsite wasn't left behind. It wasn't abandoned. It was waiting for someone. And I was never supposed to find it.